I know that I'm on. And before I begin talking about the book of John, I need to ask the Lord for his help, because I need it. Lord Jesus, I ask you that you would speak through me today, and I pray that your Holy Spirit would illuminate all of our hearts so we would understand what you want us to understand out of this, and that you would show us, each one of us, how this applies to our own heart and our own life. If there's anything I say that is for my own purposes or is not true, I pray that you would just let it fall away. Pray in your name, Jesus. Amen. Amen. Well, we have been in the book of John, and we've made it now to the trial of Jesus. We've finished chapter 18, which is the first half of the trial of Jesus is at the end of 18. And now we're in John chapter 19, which is the rest of the trial of Jesus. So I'm going to make some references back to the earlier part, but I'm going to begin by just reading our section, which is chapter 19, verses 1 to 16. John 19, 1 to 16. It says, Then Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and arrayed him in a purple robe. They came up to him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews, and struck him with their hands. Pilate went out again and said to them, See, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no guilt in him. So Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, Behold the man. When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, Crucify him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God. When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, Where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? Jesus answered him, You have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given you from above. Therefore he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin. From then on Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, and in Aramaic, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, Behold your king! They cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said to them, Shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests answered, We have no king but Caesar. So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. Now, this is the trial of Jesus in front of Pontius Pilate. Pilate was, we would call him the governor of the Roman province of Judea. His real title was prefect, which prefect was an official who held authority not in his own right. Like an elected official had authority in and of himself. A prefect had authority because he had been sent there by somebody who had authority. And in fact, he had authority underneath the authority of the governor of Syria. Syria was a more important and wealthier province to the north, and that governor had authority over Pilate. Pilate had authority over Judea, but the governor of Syria and Pilate got their authority ultimately from the emperor in Rome. Now, Pilate eventually will be removed from his office by the governor of Syria and sent back to Rome, but that's in the future. Right now, Pilate is enjoying having a very prominent position and a lucrative position being the governor of Judea. Judea was an important province in Rome. We have the impression of of this region at the time of Jesus, we might have an impression of it being a place of sort of scattered villages and deserty place here and there. And actually we get that impression in from books and things. It started in the 19th century when people like Mark Twain and visited Israel back in the 1800s, and they said, this place is empty. And so we got this idea, which some of you may not have this idea, but some may have the idea that Israel was kind of a backwater, but it wasn't in Jesus' day. It was much, it was greener, it was central. Jerusalem was a large and significant city. The temple in Jerusalem was world famous. And the religion of the Jews was world famous because it was different and it was weird, and magicians around the world tried to like conjure with the name of this Jewish god and stuff. And anyway, it was important. And Pilate made some serious money with his rake-off of the Jewish taxes. That was normal at the time. That wasn't corruption. That was just what you do. So he wanted to hold on to his position here. It was kind of important. And he had been told that they were, we assume he had heard that the Jewish leaders were going to arrest a dangerous man the night before. And so he's up very early to hear this guy's trial. And the trial in John is interesting that the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, focus on the Jewish trial, and there's less about Pilate. This is almost entirely about Pilate and the Roman trial. And there's actually, it's very carefully planned in 7 sequences, a sequence of 7. You have, there's an outside where the Jews demand Jesus' death. Then Pilate goes inside and questions Jesus about his kingship. Then Pilate goes outside and finds Jesus not guilty. And then he goes inside for the scourging. That's where we picked up. And then he goes outside again and finds Jesus not guilty again. And then he goes inside and talks to Jesus about power, which is parallel with him talking about kingship. And then he goes outside and the Jewish leaders get their death sentence that they wanted at the beginning. So it is a carefully organized passage, and that careful organization doesn't, like if you just read it, like I normally do, you don't necessarily notice that. But when you study it, you see that John is doing that. Now, going through this trial, in the beginning, in chapter 18, you have a few comments about what had happened before our text. And one is that the Jews come to Pilate, and they say, well, here's the guy, we want him killed. And he says, well, what are the charges? This is normal. If you're a judge, you do want to know, what are the charges against this guy? And the Jewish leaders, who they call them the Jews, but it's the highest leadership of Israel is what he's referring to. They say, well, if you weren't guilty, we wouldn't be bringing him to you, which is just absurd. I mean, like, you think about that. Like, he won't actually even bring a charge. They just say, where's your rubber stamp? Come on, just rubber stamp this thing and kill the guy. But Pilate, he could have done that. It would have been the most peaceful thing for him to do, would be to say, all right, great. This is an easy win. I'll rubber stamp you. It's Passover. Anytime there's a festival, there's the potential that there's going to be problems. To get the Jewish leaders on his side, that would have been easy. But Pilate isn't that kind of a guy. So we're not looking at a guy who's just totally evil and bad and corrupt. He doesn't rubber stamp this thing. He wants to know, is this fair? Is this right? Is this the right thing to do? Does it accord with Roman law? And so he wants to know more. And this is what he shows his contempt for them, in fact, by saying, try him yourself, and kill him yourself, because he knows that they can't execute him. They have taken away, the Romans took away the Sanhedrin's right to bring the death sentence, which on the side, I think it's Josephus said, that happened sometime when Jesus would have been a little boy, the Romans officially withdrew their permission. And Josephus, the Jewish historian, records that when the Sanhedrin heard that they had lost the right to execute people, they saw that as a withdrawal, that Israel has lost its authority. And so they said, they made reference to the end of Genesis where it says that the scepter will not depart until the Messiah comes. So they understood it. And they said the scepter has departed from Israel and the Messiah has not come. And little did they know that he had come. So Pilate shows some contempt for them. History records that Pilate did not think much of Israel's their weird customs and things. He did not bend himself to come to understand them, although he is going in and out. It says he's going outside to the Jewish people. He's doing this because he knows they don't want to come in. If they come in, they will probably be ritually impure. They had this rule not to go into a Gentile's house. There's nothing actually wrong with it. I mean, if you got technical, it did not make you impure to enter a Gentile's house if you're Jewish. It's just that there were so many things in the Gentile's house that might make them impure. There were things that maybe a dead thing had touched one of his objects. His wife would not have followed the Jewish purity laws with her cycle. And there's things that you just don't know. If you go into his house, you don't know if you're going to be, if you're going to become impure and thus not able to perform, be part of the Sabbath or be the Sabbath, any of those Passover things. And so, and since being good Pharisees, if there's a chance that you could be impure, you assume that you are, guilty unless proven innocent. They didn't. So Pilate is going in and out. So that at least he is bending to them a little bit. Okay. The thing I want to focus on is in 36, or wait, no, 26. Or, no, it can't be 26 because that's not. So it's in some verse that. But you know what? The verse is the first one I said. They say when you take a test, go with your first instinct. Boy, is that right. Jesus says, when he says in 36, Pilate answers him, "What have you done?" Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world." And so we hear this, and I realize that I unconsciously, for most of my life, have thought, his kingdom is not of this world. It's like this some spiritual thing. It's this sort of spiritual kingdom. It's sort of secondary. It's over people's hearts and emotions, and it doesn't really threaten. It doesn't threaten imperial rule or any of the things that matter to the Romans, because it's just some emotional thing. And that shows that I am a product of my time, and where we tend to think emotional things or spiritual things that can't be touched and seen, are somehow secondary. They're just opinion, And I realize what Jesus is actually saying is, my kingdom is not of this world. He is inviting Pilate into another world. He is revealing a deeper reality, that his kingdom is a different kind of kingdom. But Pilate doesn't take the bait. He doesn't want it. He's not interested in some kingdom that is not about this world that he can touch and see. But in reality, Jesus' kingdom is a higher kingdom. It's not a lower kingdom. It's not a sideways kingdom. It's the kingdom that this world is derived from. And so Jesus' authority in his kingdom is higher than Pilate's authority in Pilate's kingdom. This is the equivalent of a child meeting the president and asking the president, "Are you a teacher at my school?" Or maybe the principal, and him saying, "No, I don't work at your school at all. I have nothing, and he says, "Oh, then you're not important," right?
I only care about the stuff with the school. And it's like, well, really, the whole school's authority, the salary of your principal, everything is derived from executive authority, ultimately. Though American Constitution, you get it. So that's what Jesus is saying. His authority is derived, our authority is derived from the authority of Jesus and his kingdom. Because of the nature of Jesus' kingdom, even death itself in this world has to bow to him. The highest penalty that the rulers of this world can impose, even that is subservient to the authority, Jesus' authority in his kingdom. It's not that Jesus's kingdom is not of this world, not because he can't take over this world, he doesn't have the power to. It's not appropriate right now. And he is allowing this world to continue on in its own way for a while. So, here we go. So then Jesus has these conversations with Pilate. Pilate shows some interest to him. Like, Pilate says, so you're a king? In 37. Jesus says, you say I am a king. I've read numerous commentators on this sentence, you say I am a king. It's like you say so, or so you say, and it seems like it's a vague statement. A vague statement. But it is somewhat positive, apparently. So he's just basically saying, yeah, you say I'm a king. Yeah, and it's implied that, yes, I am. But he's not coming out straight and says it. And so then Pilate, then he says, you say I'm a king. For this purpose, Jesus says, I was born. This is 37:18. And for this purpose, I have come into the world, which we heard last week, to bear witness to the truth. This is Jesus' purpose, what's happening here. So he's bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Now, Pilate is trying to be a judge, and judges want to come to find the truth. And the Romans believed that. The Romans believed in truth. They had high ideals. And they had inherited Greek philosophy in a lot of ways, a lot of the values of Greek philosophy, which was a search for truth. Philosophy means the loving wisdom, the love of wisdom, the love of truth. And so Jesus says, everyone who's of the truth listens to my voice. It's another invitation to Pilate. He's dealing with Pilate as a person. It's almost like another Nicodemus talk. But unlike Nicodemus, Pilate just keeps refusing the bait. He doesn't engage. He says, what is truth? And so, it's sort of cynical. You hear a cynicism in there. What is truth? Maybe somebody who's been in politics for a long time, that kind of world will beat you down. That kind of world will give you a cynical view of the world. You have people who claim high ideals, and then you see when push comes to shove, maybe those ideals aren't quite so important. Or there's a guy and his ideals are very important to him, but not so important as becoming governor of Gaul or something. That suddenly it's like, well, I can have ideals, I could be the president, one or the other. So he had this cynicism. But so he again Pilate tries to get Jesus released. Maybe I can release him for you on this Passover release program that we have. And so they actually ask for Barabbas to be released. So now instead of because Pilate is convinced that Jesus is innocent. He's like, this is some Jewish thing that's going on that I'm getting caught up in. He's not dumb. He realizes he's a tool for this and what's going on. And now he's agreed to give up an insurrectionist who actually is a threat to Roman power, the kind of thing that could get him in trouble. So he's stuck. He tries again, though. So then he goes in 19. Now we're in our actual text. Pilate took Jesus and flogged him. Now, there were three kinds of flogging. The three different words for flogging. They had two of them were judicial floggings, and they had one that was a flogging before execution, which I guess is a kind of judicial flogging, but it's to speed your death. This is the two types of judicial. There's a light one and a heavy one, and the light one was what you would do for people who for like disturbing the peace and this kind of a thing. You would just do a light flogging, which still happens in the world. I've got a friend in American guy. They lived in Serbia. This is the 90s, so not necessarily nowadays. But this guy was seen stealing a stereo, and the police saw him, recognized him. It's a true story. Saw him, recognized him, so they just called him home and said, "Come down to the police station." So the guy went down to the police station. They put him in a room, and a cop comes in with some kind of rod and just beat the guy. And there was no judicial process or anything. It was just like, hey, now you know not to steal for the stereo. But the reason that the guy told me the story is that this guy lived in the American's neighborhood, the thief, but the policeman did too. And it was the end of the working day, so the cop asked the guy, "Well, would you give me a ride home?" And the guy's like, "Yeah, sure." So he just took him home. And there didn't seem to be any recriminations about that. I have another friend that they took him, they found him with drugs, and they took him, there's a small amount. And they took him to the police station, they stripped him buck naked, and they handcuffed him in an interrogation room. He's sitting here feeling rather vulnerable. And then they drag in some other dude. He has no idea who this guy is. They don't say a word to this guy at all. They just drag this guy in, and they beat him in front of him. And then they drag him out again, unlock my friend's things, throw him his clothes, and walk away without any explanation. To this day, he has no idea who that guy was, why they beat him in front of him. He thinks that he must have been another guy, a drug dealer or something, and they're just trying to teach him a lesson. But he put his clothes on, and as he got out, he sees, as he's leaving the police station, he looks in a room, and he sees some other dude handcuffed to a radiator, sobbing and crying. And he's like, okay, it's like something from a film, you know. So he's just out of there. He's out. He's gone. You know, I'm like, okay, I've learned my lesson. So flogging to teach somebody a lesson is a long established human practice. And that is probably what they did to Jesus here. The light flogging, the warning flogging. The second kind of beating would be one that would be as an actual sentence for a serious crime, because they didn't really have imprisonment. I mean, like they had imprisonment, but it was imprisonment to await trial. They didn't really have prisons where they would hold you for years. That was very impractical given their level of organization, and I don't know, maybe they hadn't even thought of it. But so if a person committed a crime, they would just beat you and put you back out on the street, which I think for some crimes, to be honest, would be a more effective method than throwing you in prison, because then, and in fact, honestly, I remember thinking, if I were falsely accused and they could either take like 4 years of my life or give me 15 lashes, I'd take the lashes. Sure. So anyway, they did this, and probably what Pilate is doing here is saying, he is trying to get their sympathy. Here he is, he's been beaten, he's gotten mocked. I find no guilt in him, and he's trying to get the Jews to say, oh, look at that guy, okay, this is enough. I've taken his honor, you know, he's been dishonored, but Jesus, they don't take his honor. He's still totally composed, quiet, not begging for mercy. And so, going to verse 5, he takes Jesus out and he says, behold the man. And he's probably trying to say, look at this poor man, you know, here. But actually, he is speaking more than he knows. Because remember, in the beginning of the book, he was called the Lamb of God twice. And now at the end, he is called the man. I mean, Jesus is the man. He is the ultimate human being. He is the representative of the entire human race. Here's the man. He's the Lamb of God. He's the man. And Jesus is what he's about to say later is, behold, your king. So at the beginning, twice he is called the Lamb of God. At the end of the book, he's called the man and the king. These are Jesus' declared. And he has declared this by the highest Roman official, the highest official of human authority that could be there, that declares Jesus to be the man. So in the claim, then he finds out that Pilate finds out the charge Jesus claimed to be that he claimed to be the Son of God. And this shows that the Jewish leaders understood Jesus when he said that he's the Son of God, that they understood that he was claiming to be on the same level as God in some sense. Now, they would not have thought he's claiming to be Yahweh himself, because that is so far out of, that is just simply impossible. It wouldn't cross their mind. But they could understand he certainly is claiming to be at the same level, the level that's blasphemous and he should be killed. So it was not, because you could call yourself Son of God, or some of the kings were referred to as Son of God, and angels are referred to as sons of God. It was not the case that Jesus was just claiming to be the Messiah, like David is son of God in the sense that God gave him the Davidic covenant, and I will discipline your descendant like my son. It's not just a little misunderstanding. Which nowadays there are people who say that Jesus never claimed to be God. He was just claiming to be the king, and he was misunderstood with his Son of God claim. So I say this goes against the modern idea that Jesus was just making a royal claim, which was misunderstood by his contemporaries, with whom Jesus shared a common language, culture, and historical experiences, but was clear to Europeans and Americans in the 21st century. If we had just been there to clear it up, it would have been fine. He's incapable of explaining, oh no, is there like nailing him to the cross? I didn't mean I was, come on. So now Pilate would have understood this to mean that Jesus claimed to be like a demigod, a messenger of the gods, or some demigod like that. They did believe that the divine would touch the human world. There's the story of Marathon. I think it's when the guy ran, the Greek guy brought the message of he was going to the Spartans. That's it. Sorry, I'm just recalling this. And there's a Greek story of he goes to the Spartans to ask the Spartans to help them fight the Persians from Athens. On the way, he met the Greek god Pan. And he just reports this. He reported this as part of his regular report, and everybody believed, okay, and on the way you met the god Pan. Okay, this is normal. So it was within their normal thinking that he could be possibly a divine being. That's within his worldview. So he is then scared. Pilate's like, what? He claimed to be Son of God. And he goes in and asks him, where are you from? Which is interesting because the book earlier talks about where Jesus came from. It emphasizes where he came from. But to Pilate, Jesus doesn't answer. And so then when Jesus says this thing about you have no authority, he says, so Pilate said to him after he says, where are you from? Will you not speak to me? Do you not know I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you? Jesus answered him, you would have no authority over me at all, unless it had been given you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin. Now, he is probably referring to the Jewish leaders, but it's sad that there has been anti-Semitism out of this, that people call Jews the Christ killers and this kind of a thing. To me, we are all Christ killers. And to judge the Jewish race is a massive exercise in missing the point. Completely. I'm not saying you can't be saved and think that, but you can't be very reflective about yourself and blame them somehow. And the thing that struck me the first time that I read this, for preparing for this, I got the very strong impression is that Jesus said this, you have no authority at all. And Jesus doesn't make any attempt to get himself out of the situation. You know, I mean, there's many places where Jesus could have said something that would have pushed Pilate to let him go. Pilate wasn't dead set on killing him. But what Jesus knows that what is ahead of him is the Father's will. He knows it's the Father's will. Desmond made a similar point a couple weeks ago, that he went forward knowing it. He went forward, he was saying. He stepped out. And so when we know that when hardship comes our way, the way to handle it is to head into it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't take normal and reasonable precautions against difficulty in life, because that's just being wise. But when something comes your way and you have to, you know that this hardship is coming your way, often health things, work things, relational things, and a normal moral and ethical behavior won't get you out of it. Jesus' example is to head into it. Right. Head into it, because that is God's will. And Jesus taught us that, but then he showed us this, the ultimate example of just heading into God's will. Now, we aren't supposed to make trouble or seek out trials. Each day has enough trouble of its own, and we don't need to glut the market, with making our own. But, and so, we have like this, it reminds me of the story of the stilling of the storm, where they say, why didn't you trust Jesus? Jesus, of course the boat isn't going to sink. Say, well, actually, I don't know that. And, businesses do fail. How many Christian businessmen have begged God to save their business and watched it go bankrupt? Businesses fail, houses burn down, spouses die, spouses leave you, your kids do things that tear your heart out, or things happen to them. These things happen in this world. Right. And what we do is you have to cling to God through these things. Amen. Cling to him, and he will carry you through the storm. But boy, it is not easy. It is not easy. You don't just walk above the water. I remember this guy saying in college saying, doesn't matter how deep the water is as long as you're walking on it. It's like, yeah, that sounds great. So he actually went out praying for trials. He said, I'm going to quit school. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to evangelize. I never heard from him again, because you don't, it has enough trouble of its own. And you don't walk on the water. It's hard. Yeah, the thing about the suffering of the world is, the other thing is that it's, sometimes you'll hear people say it's deserved. Everybody sort of deserves it. That's the karma idea. Or that it's, that suffering it all comes out fairly in the end. Well, Stalin was a deeply unhappy man. It's true. He was terrified, paranoid, very unhappy man. But I don't think that that's very much comfort to the millions upon millions of Ukrainians that he starved to death. Oh, that guy in Moscow who's not starving to death, he's deeply unhappy. Oh, that makes it all better. It just doesn't. It doesn't. And the basic fact about suffering is it's very unevenly and very unfairly distributed. But we do know that it's all in the hands of God. And so, God does not just take suffering away from those who trust him, but what he does is he gives it purpose. He gives your suffering purpose. So how do we know how to handle suffering? You do what Jesus did. You head into it. He showed us with the ultimate example. Nothing can happen without the Father's permission. Nothing can happen without God's permission. Suffering is often the way forward. Okay, C.S. Lewis said, give up yourself, and you will find your real self. Lose your life, and you will save it. Keep back nothing. Nothing you have not given away will ever be really yours. Nothing in you that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. that therefore, it says in Hebrews, being surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who endured such hostility of sinners against himself, that lest you grow weary and faint in your mind. And so Jesus showed us that that glory is on the other side of suffering. And this is a principle we can see in life. Anybody who exercises and who wants to run a marathon, anybody who wants to be muscular and impress people, or just to be healthy, anybody that has gone to boot camp, the glory is on the other side. It's on the other side of the suffering, not this side. You've got to go through it to the other side, and that's where it is. And Jesus showed us he went through it to the other side. He went through the greatest of suffering, and he got the greatest of rewards. So now there's ways not to embrace suffering. Numbing behaviors, anger at God, revenging yourself on God, sinning in order to get back or whatever. Now, when you do these things, we're humans, and you're going to be angry at God sometimes. That's normal and okay, but that's not the way through the suffering. Grapple with him, yes. Just bring it to him, bring your anger to him, but that's some of these things. There are ways not to head into the suffering. These are ways to avoid grappling with the suffering. There was a boy in my church down in Georgia, 13-year-old boy, grew up in the church. We, knew him, loved him. He went to camp and simply just dropped dead. Just died. Like they didn't even have a cause of death for the longest time. He just simply, his eyes rolled back in his head and he died. And it was, very tragic. And his mother, months later, was talking to a relative and saying that she is coming to accept this from God's hand. And the relative was like, well, you don't have to accept it or not. It's reality. That's that. And she said, no, you have to accept it. And she had come to a deep understanding of this. Because you could say, oh, you just, it's real. You go through it. That's it. You got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. So deal with it. It's like, no, you have to do this. Accepting it is part of grappling with the Lord as you go through this thing. Holding on to the Lord as you go through this thing, and he will take you through that suffering. Amen. Now, not all suffering has a noble purpose. If you have spent your life dodging and weaving, like Barry Sanders breaking a tackle, if you're old enough to remember Barry Sanders, then the time when all this comes back, that you have spent your life avoiding all kind of confrontation, eventually this will come back and bite you. In that case, maybe you should have been more honest. Maybe you should have been, it's all the good that's going to come out of the suffering that comes from your dishonesty, let's say, is the fact that you'll learn, I shouldn't have been dishonest. So that isn't necessarily that noble, but even the Lord won't even waste that. Won't even waste that suffering. So on the other side of the cross, Jesus has all authority, and he will not abandon you. He will not abandon you or forsake you. He is the same yesterday, today, yes, and forever. He will never leave you nor forsake you. And he will take you through the suffering just like he himself went through the suffering. So now as this goes on, Pilate grows in conviction of Jesus' innocence, but also the realization he's going to have to kill him. He understands that Jesus is not a threat. And so he's going to release him. And the leaders say, if you release this man, you're not Caesar's friend. Everybody who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. See, they're playing their trump card now. Now, the friend of Caesar seems to be a semi-technical term that means you're an associate of the emperor. And there was a phrase we have from a Roman historian that said, every friend of Sejanus is a friend of Caesar. Sejanus was like the prime minister, basically, at this time. And he made all the decisions. Pilate had his his position because he was a friend of Sejanus. Now, Sejanus was executed by the emperor around about this time, but we don't know if this had happened already or was about to happen, and we don't know if Pilate was feeling some pressure because the guy who gave him this position was about to lose his position. We don't know. So he was feeling a little unstable. And so they are going to complain to Rome. You know, if you release a guy who claims to be a king, you're not a friend of Caesar. That means they're going to complain to Rome, and then Pilate will have all of his doings examined critically. So basically, they're saying, if you do this, we're going to have your internet search history made public. And he's like, oh goodness, you know. So he was not willing to do that, and so they say. Now, the thing about this is, skipping it, I'll just have to say real quickly, this happened on Friday. The Passover was the day before, okay? When it talks about the day of the preparation of the Passover, that is the day of preparation. Every case we have of that phrase, it refers to the preparation for the Sabbath day. So there's a question about what day this happened on. This did happen on Friday, which I wish I had more time to talk about. This was a Friday, and the Passover was the day before. But I spent that time telling you about my friend in Serbia whose friend got beaten, which is probably funnier than hearing about the Passover. So in this thing, Jesus is speaking, if you read, more like the judge than the defendant. Towards the end, he even says, those who, handed me over have the greater sin. That's actually, he's pronouncing a sentence. He's actually evaluating. So this is actually the trial of Pilate. It's not it's the trial of Jesus, but it's also the trial of Pilate. Amen. And this is the time when Pilate, it's a defining moment of Pilate's life, though Pilate doesn't see it. Now, Pilate knew that it wasn't a case like the guy whose buddy asks him to have a cup of coffee and, hey, here's my friend, and the three of them talk for a while, and the guy doesn't know he's interviewing for the job of his dream job, which has happened before. You don't know that this is an important, significant thing. You don't know that what's going to happen is important. So Pilate knew this was important. But he didn't know that this was the defining moment of his life. He didn't understand that this is where his character is going to be shown, because this is an innocent man. He's a Roman governor. He is responsible and expected to release the innocent. And he isn't going to do it because he has spent too much of his life choosing his career over what's right. And in the same way, our lives are made up of the small decisions we make over and over and over again. Do we have courage? That's the question. Courage is not a virtue in and of itself. Courage is like a meta virtue. It defines the intensity with which you have some other virtue. That's why C.S. Lewis says, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, which means at the point of highest reality. And so do you have the courage to be honest? Do you have the courage to choose to do the right thing in this way? And also, how do you live your life? I have an example that you won't be hearing about when my character was tested and I didn't step up to the plate. I just didn't do it. And it's because I had spent so much of my life being a peacemaker and avoiding saying things that would bother people, even when I knew that this person was saying something that wasn't true. And I was like, I'll just let them go. Like, what does it matter? And it's like, well, maybe it matters that I'm the guy that the Lord made sure knew that what was true and put me there in that situation. But I didn't want to have any confrontation. So, and it ended up in a situation where I realized I should have said something, and it was, yeah, that was my character. But the thing is, when the Lord allowed that to happen to me, as he will to you, he knew that I was not going to do that. He knew I was not going to speak in that situation. And so the question is, who is the trial for? It's for me, to reveal it to myself. My failure reveals me to myself. And then I can begin to recognize, oh, this is not, I have not made the right choices in this way, and I've not formed my character to be strong in this way. And so then you can go to the Lord with it, and he can say, that's right. Let's practice the stuff you're not good at instead of practicing the stuff you are good at. Now, that concludes our time for now. And so Jesus has been tried, he's been found guilty, and he's going to go off to be crucified. And we'll be hearing about that next week.